In keeping with Chevron's tradition of service throughout the 20th century, the people of Chevron bring you this program in support of public television.
Hailed as the luxury liner of the air, the Hindenburg horrible end has shocked the entire world.
Why not put out feelers and see how hubby would like you in this? All in all, you must say that these styles are...
We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
I'd sure like to have that kidnapper alone for just about 4 minutes. Well, come back soon, little Lindy. Our hearts are with you.
I'm speaking to you. I want you to do what I tell you. Now, keep your head down. This young boy is just starting you. Not that far down. The newsreels are on you. Smile.
The newsreels, as one cynic described them, a series of catastrophes ended by a fashion show. I'm Bill Moyers, and this is a strip of yesterday. An old newsreel containing crude but moving images of the 20th century, our century. Just as rough pictures on the walls of ancient caves represent some of the earliest entries into the family album of the human race, these newsreels are another much later addition to the growing archives of our collective memory. For over 50 years of this century, they appeared in our local movie houses, a predictable part of every program somewhere between the popcorn and the cartoon. I've been told that around 500 million feet of motion picture film were taken during the era of the newsreel, and I think I must have seen just about every frame on alternate Saturdays at the old Lynn and Paramount theaters in Marshall, Texas. I took unabashed pleasure in the Tom Mix westerns, the Buck Rogers serials, and the Bugs Bunny cartoons, but I gave my heart to the newsreels. That dime I handed the lady in the ticket booth took me to far-off places like Paris, Berlin, and New York City. Gave me a front-row seat for a pageant of gangsters, presidents, and kings that would have made Chaucer envious, and even put me as a kid behind home plate when the great Babe swung his mighty bat. Aladdin, with his magic lantern, never had more exciting adventures than I did with a dime at the matinee. Here is where generations divide. My 3 children, who grew up with television, like many of you, have never seen newsreels in a movie theater. But for us old-timers, they alone brought us moving images of momentous days. Now, no one ever will confuse newsreels with high art. Soon after they first appeared in 1911, the newsreels were controlled by the major film studios, whose purpose was to entertain, not inform. Newsreels became, well, show business. Fascinating audiences, but frustrating critics who called them trivial and superficial and accused them of ducking controversy for fear of offending the customers. By and large, the critics were right, but the newsreels will have the last word. They will outlive us. When future generations want to know what we look like, how we dressed and talked, they will turn to the newsreels. For over 50 years, the sound and visual record of our century.
Newsreel camera records a fatal leap. Her parachute never opens. In sight of agonized thousands, she falls to a mercifully swift death.
What was the newsreel? It was the television of its day, of course. Everything that took place in the world up until 1947 was either on the newsreel or it wasn't.
Ed Herlihy. For 25 years, he described scenes of war and peace, fads and fashions, his resonant voice booming through movie theaters across America. He was the voice of Universal News.
Victory in Europe brought wild rejoicing throughout the Allied world as the Big Three announced the downfall of Nazi Germany. New York's celebration is typical of the nation's joy at the end of nearly 6 years of war in Europe. It's a great day as a thankful people let loose their pent-up emotions.
I don't know whether you were in Times Square that day. I was. And that was something to behold, to see those people.
There's a hard road ahead before we bring Japan to her knees, and it's up to us to get back on the job until complete victory is assured. Let us thank God for the peace that has come.
Newsreel started as a filler. People went to the movies to see the feature movie, of course. But you also saw a comedy, and you saw the coming attractions, and sometimes you saw a short subject, as we call them, a travelogue or something of the sort, and the newsreel. The newsreels gained and gained in popularity through the years because, especially with men, because they could see the sports that they wanted to see, and they could see the great plays of the games that they wanted to see. And they finally ended up with newsreel theaters that did nothing but newsreels, and they were great places for salesmen to go when they wanted to kill an hour. Instead of going to the porno houses of today, they went to see the newsreel theater.
Blitzkrieg, New German...
Most people don't realize is that it was a silent war. Pictures were not shot with sound as they are today. We made the war. We put the sound on in that little stage on Monday and Thursday nights. So when the war took place, the bomb exploded in the air. That was our bomb from the control room in the sound effects man's department. He pushed his little micrometer screw and...
By Kamikaze, the Jap suicide pilots.
We always had pretty girls in bathing suits. That always had to be a part of it. We always had to have one of those in there somewhere. So a little cheesecake was acceptable and desirable, and it balanced off the whole package.
In Egypt, they have a national problem, which has everyone tossing and turning. Cairo's belly dancers are tossing their tummies while everyone is turning his head to watch. The girls claim their naval maneuvers reveal less than the local beach. Anyone for a swim?
Here's one about the Russian rocket, the first one to the moon. That was the 7th of October, 1957. Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket. Here, an artist's conception of how the feat was accomplished.
We didn't have a picture, you see, so we had to draw cartoons of how this thing worked, and it was animated. So that's what we told about as we described what the Russians had done. That was the first Sputnik.
You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
Yeah, there always was entertainment in them, and that we made that a very special point. But they also went in to see what the latest baseball game, how the World Series turned out.
It's a double to center past Hank Aaron.
They wanted to know what the latest fashions were.
Old raccoon coats never die. They don't even fade away. The Roaring Twenties and the Flappers are far behind us, but you'd never know it to look at today's co-eds and their back-to-campus wardrobe and transportation. Underneath those raccoon coats, fashions follow new lines.
The Ivy League look, a combination of kilts and leotards for lounging around the green. What else? Oh, yeah. Get in the swing with striped
collegiate shirt and black taper pants, maybe. Some taper. The way of the fair on the fairway.
The way of the fair on the fairway. Pretty corny, but that's the way we did it.
Like contemporary television reporting, the weekly newsreel was a team effort. But in the theatrical newsreel, the music editor had the authority of a maestro, and the cameraman who brought back the pictures was a veritable titan. A titan before whom the lordly strutted, ladies paraded, and disasters erupted as if on cue. Sometimes the cue was given by the lowliest member of the entourage, the reporter, known in the trade as the contact man.
It would have to be a very rare occasion that a contact man, as we were known, would be seen in the picture, which of course is quite the opposite from the situation today when the first thing you see is the reporter who's out there with the crew saying, well, Jim, I'm out here on 49th Street and the building is still burning. And so we see him and we listen to him and eventually we may even get a look at the burning building.
Tom McMorrow. In newsreel parlance, he was the contact man, the off-camera reporter who organized each day's filming. He began with Paramount News in 1948 and was with the newsreels until the 1960s.
The major motion picture companies used the newsreels as a tool for their own ends. The major studios were interested in getting the premieres of their big movies covered, and getting the stars filmed, frolicking at the swimming pool or otherwise.
Make like an artistic dive. You back up a little bit for... Oh, get out!
The newsreel was presented in a rather overblown manner for what we're used to today. It started off with a tremendous fanfare, a stirring march, and then with a clash of cymbals would go into the first story. And these stories, of course, all had musical scores. And one of the marvels of the newsreel business was that in a matter of hours, a brilliant music editor would score an entire 10-minute film with music appropriate to a fashion story, a ski jump, a boxing match, and a political speech, and make it all come out even at the end and go into the final.
Oh, the difference between a silent film and a film with music on it was enormous. As soon as music was put on, it seemed to come to life. It gave the stories involved great urgency and great importance.
Hi Fuchs. In 1929, Pathé News converted to sound, and Hi Fuchs joined the music department. He stayed with Pathé until the shop was closed in 1956.
This was played probably 1,000 times on various newsreel stories, ranging all the way from horse racing to politicians. In fact, this could almost go for a bathing beauty parade on the boardwalk at Atlantic City. At the opposite end of the spectrum, supposing we got a story in on strikes, riots, floods, hurricanes, just disasters, we'd go to a category called dramatic agitato, and this is all it is. A flood. raging waters. We learned. We were feeling our way in those early days. When the atom bomb went off and we got the first pictures, what kind of music do you put on an atom bomb going off? And we learned that silence was the most awesome sound that we could get.
When I came into the newsreel business in the late 1940s, the cameraman was king. The cameramen of those days were, for the most part, men who had started when the newsreels started, around 1920.
This particular camera was used when the Wright brothers were flying the Wright plane.
They came out of the silent era when the camera was everything. There was no sound, there was no music, it was only the picture. And the cameraman was supreme.
It's what's known as a hand crank camera. And we call this a coffee grinder. That's what we called it. And this is why.
Dennis Bossoni. He is 2 years older than the Century and seems to have taken pictures of most of it. Bossoni is an ex-boxer well equipped to deal with the rough and tumble world of the newsreel cameraman. Through the lenses of his cameras have passed images of every U.S. president from Wilson to Nixon. He gave us the movies for dozens of Miss Americas and scores of World Series.
We tried to give them pictures so that if there was a big fire, as an example, before you got to the fire, you made a long shot. That's covering a story, part of covering a story. Then you moved in closer. And if there were houses in the area where the fire was, you focus on those houses. If you get smoke bellowing out of the building, you'd make your close-ups of the fire itself.
In those days, you learned how to deal with the cameramen. You could never tell them what to do because they would instantly ask you who the hell you thought you were, telling me, the cameraman, how to make a picture. So you learned to say, oh, look at that over there, isn't that funny? And he'd look over and he'd say, yeah, I think I'll make a shot of that. Great.
Part of the front of the building had collapsed, and the side of the building, that was still up. So I said to the fire chief, I said, hey, Bill, I said, what are you going to do about that wall? He said, why? I said, why the hell did you knock it down for me? I'd make a hell of a shot, you know. He says, well, let me get the dozer in here. So they got the dozer in with a bucket. It had a high bucket, you know, and he just hit the wall a couple of times, and it collapsed, and it started another fire. But that was another picture that I had gotten a commendation for. Not only that, but they gave me $25 extra. I was making pretty good money in those days. As a matter of fact, I think I made more than my father made. And my father was the head chipper in an iron foundry. When I come home with my paycheck or my check or my cash, my mom would say, well, you made more money than your father did.
They were very brave and daring men who would hang off the tops of buildings, hang off the bottom of helicopters, do anything to get that story, including the fact that they think they would have killed you if you got on the way while he's trying to shoot it.
Oh, God, you went through hell when you were a newsreel man, because a lot of people always tried to cut you out of something, or they try to get in your way or something like that. And when we've got a hold of a guy like that, why, we'd either take the tripod and put it on our shoulder and run right into the guy. Either that, if we had a hand camera and he got funny, we just stuck the camera in his ribs, or we hit him in the jaw with it, which happened several times with me as far as I was concerned. Then we get a hold of a guy that we didn't like, and he got fresh, and he had a car, and he was getting in the way with a car. He tried to bump us with a car. Why, when he wasn't looking, why, we'd just take the tire and flatten it for him.
And they were, without question, the romance men of the whole industry.
And if you got a cameraman that wasn't a professional cameraman, that wasn't in our business and had no business being on the scene, and he happened to be some fresh kid with a camera that wanted to get out in the foreground and make himself look big, why, we'd always talk to him and try to be nice with him. And when the kid had his head turned around where he was talking to another cameraman, if we had a piece of gum in our mouth, stuck it right on his lens. And if they didn't like that, then we kicked them in the shins.
They kind of needed a buffer between them and the more genteel aspects of our society that they might be called upon to photograph. And that was then the contact man's function. I recall, for example, when General de Gaulle visited New York, he was standing up, he's of course 6'6", tall, austere, proud, magnificent man, arrogant, steely-eyed, and cameramen yelling at him, "Hey, de Gaulle, over here, over here!" Fortunately, the general did not understand English.
The first thing you learn when you're a photographer is that you got to have a stomach for it. You got to feel that if the guy standing alongside him is a doctor and it doesn't make him sick, see, I got to feel the same way as he does, because if I get sick, this guy's going to say, what the hell kind of a sissy is this guy that he can't take it? You learn to stomach these things, and you learn that when you go into an area, there's a disaster, you forget what the disaster is. What you're thinking about is what kind of pictures am I going to get so that the public will see what they didn't see or what they couldn't go to see. Because public isn't invited to all these accidents, all these disasters, train wrecks and that kind of stuff.
The German Zeppelin Hindenburg, Queen of the Skies, seen here from a universal newsreel camera plane as it sped over New York to its tragic end at Lakehurst, New Jersey, now lies at the Naval Air Station a twisted mass of metal.
We had been on forest fires all that day and all the 2 nights before that, all through Jersey. And we were in the area, and I called New York, and New York says, no, we're going to send Al Gold and A.A. Brown down to shoot it in sound. You go on home and get some sleep. You got too much overtime in.
Slowly the big ship warps in, and the ground crews rush for the mooring line. In another 10 minutes or so, the great aircraft would have been snugly docked. But as the passengers crowded the windows to watch, a roar and a burst of flame, here the big tail fins turned the ship into a flaming inferno.
As I got in the house and laid down on the bed for about an hour, I got a call from New York. They said, get the hell back to Lakehurst right away. The Hindenburg blew up. See? Down I went.
Passengers and crew, the fortunate among them, fell or jumped and were dragged to safety before the fiery furnace took their lives.
When I got there, all I could find down there was bodies being taken into the hangar.
It's the greatest of miracles that anyone came out of the disaster alive.
These things behind me are part of the Hindenburg. Well, I wanted them more for souvenirs, and I wanted to feel that I had something that I could look back to in years to come.
The message that shocked the world comes in on the police teletype. Only a few minutes have passed since the message was flashed. It isn't much beyond midnight, and already the state troopers are going through the neighborhood with a fine-tooth comb to meet the challenge of a criminal degenerate. Not a single bet is overlooked, not a single suspicion unverified in the search for the most famous baby in the world. Innocent, 20-month-old son of the Lone Eagle and his mate, the victim of as cruel and fiendish a crime as any human can be guilty of.
Didn't you lie on the rope? Time and time again, didn't you? I did not. You did not? No.
I shot some of the stuff in the courtroom, and it was when Hoffman was on the stand.
You had a $20 bill. Lindbergh ransom money. Did they ask you where you got it? Did they ask you? They did. Did you lie to them or did you tell them the truth? Did you lie to them or did you tell them the truth? I said nothing to them. You lied, didn't you? I did, yes.
The courtroom was small, and there were only 3 people, 3 camera people allowed in.
What do you suppose he wanted it for? What do you suppose he did with it? He wanted that money so he could, as he did, live a life of luxury and ease so he wouldn't have to work. He quit his job the day he collected the $50,000. The very day.
The town itself was so filled with souvenir hunters thinking they'd get some pieces of the child's clothes or something like that. But they did have souvenir stores. People were coming in from all over, and some of the farmers in the area even came in with some of these hay wagons and stuff. When I wasn't in the courtroom, I was out making cut-in shots. We also made the shots of the ladder being placed up against the wall to the window where the baby was kidnapped. And while the hearings were on, you stayed there in the event something else had happened. Who knew what would happen? Who knew whether or not somebody had got the Hoffman and blew his brains out? Who knew what somebody would do in reference to the jail, whether they wouldn't stick a bomb in it and blow it up?
But I want to tell the people of America that I am absolutely innocent of the crime, the murder. I shall go to death as an innocent man.
What history that is. History that changed the world forever. How many countless volumes have been written on these subjects, and how many more are yet to come. But in these brief newsreels, these events that changed the world forever are forever preserved on film.
History, yes, but it's only recently that newsreels were admitted to the august company of historical documents. At the time, old newsreels piling up in vaults were considered as useless as yesterday's newspapers. More so, actually. You can't wrap a fish with a newsreel. Only recently did anyone set out systematically to preserve old film. Since it disintegrates with time, whole decades of newsreel footage like this have turned to dust, literally, and are lost forever. But occasionally, social historians like archaeologists are surprised with unexpected gifts, fragments from which emerge other portraits in our family album, a potsherd in the cave, a coin in the stream, or celluloid in the tundra? Dawson City in the Klondike of northern Canada. In 1897, they had a gold rush. But there is more than gold buried in these barren fields. Old silent newsreels shipped to Dawson City's movie theater somehow ended up as landfill, their images literally frozen solid in the Canadian permafrost. They were discovered by workmen a half-century later and handed over to the Dawson City Museum with Kathy Jones in charge.
Well, we dug almost 800 reels of film up, and these went out to Bear Creek to a root cellar out there. And then the National Film Archives gave us a contract to go through them, clean off the rust, and eliminate any of the strips of film that the image had completely disappeared.
Like the ruins of ancient civilizations pieced together by archaeologists, these films are fragments of our century. Some of them are from World War I with young recruits marching through the streets of Chicago. But what of these strange images of young children playing war games for the benefit of the newsreel camera? these Elks will be called upon to do for their country, we may never know. A silent protest march by blacks through the streets of New York City. One sign reads, "We own 250,000 farms." But everything in these early newsreels, still in search of their form, was not news. Early viewers got to watch Mrs. Louisa Andrea demonstrating her favorite recipe. And film versions of the editorial cartoons. Their significance and humor have faded with the ages. From the reservation to civilization. For the newsreel makers of years ago, this was their idea of civilizing the natives. In their own way, the films have captured not only the images, but the mores of a bygone age. But let's not hasten to judge. What will future generations make of fragments from our daily television news broadcasts if somehow they too become frozen in time? Throughout the 1920s, the silent newsreels flourished, and when the decade ended, 5 major companies competed with each other to cover weekly events. All of them converted to sound by the early 30s, and this edition brought to the stories covered a greater sense of realism. Yet the newsreels shrank from the realities of the biggest story of all, the Depression that put 25% of the labor force out of work and pushed America toward chaos. Hard-pressed Americans went to the movies to escape. They wanted to be amused, and the newsreels that amused were of fashion shows, parades, flagpole sitters, and other human interest subjects such as the North Carolina family with 34 children who used the bathtub for a butter plate. One editor said his biggest human interest film was a duck leading a blind bull to water. And one producer, when asked what kinds of pictures were most popular with audiences, replied, soldiers, airplanes, battleships, and babies. So it was that the images of the Depression that we recall today, bread lines, shuttered factories, homeless families, were not what audiences saw on the screen at the time. It was only in 1931, as protests began to dominate the headlines, that the newsreels were forced even to acknowledge something like the Hunger March on Washington that December. The demonstrators were asking their government for unemployment insurance and welfare for the needy, reasonable demands by today's political standards. But in 1931, any group challenging a threatened social order was described as either communist or criminal. The newsreels made no pretense of objectively sorting out the players in the drama.
Capitol policemen, fully armed with riot clubs and tear gas bombs, form the reception committee for the hunger marches. Will be severely dealt with. The Washington Special Tear Gas Squad is heavily loaded for any trouble.
In the summer of 1932, newsreel cameras were filming another protest in Washington. This time it was the bonus march of World War I veterans. Several years earlier, Congress had voted ex-servicemen a pension, but not to be paid until 1945. 25,000 veterans marched to the Capitol in '32 to demand that the bonus be paid immediately during the Depression when their need was desperate. Dennis Bassoni covered the event for Fox. All the newsreels were there.
It's war, the greatest concentration of fighting troops in Washington since 1865. The 3rd Cavalry from Fort Myer, and the 1st Light Tank Regiment, the 12th Infantry from Fort Washington, all assembled with a single purpose: to rout the bonus army from government property which they have been occupying without permission. The bonus veterans have defied their leaders. The police cannot handle them since the riot this morning that ended in 1 death and dozens wounded. And so they're being forced out of their shacks by smoke bombs and tear gas hurled by the troops who have been called out by the President of the United States. Mr. Hoover doesn't blame the veterans entirely. He claims that the disorder and defiance were caused by foreign red and a large criminal element in the ranks of the veterans.
I was down there when it happened, and I think Hoover gave out an order that he didn't want us to photograph more of what was going on, that he thought at the time that it was sufficient enough for us to just forget the incident.
The soldiers have orders to burn down the unsanitary and illegal
Well,
camps.
they just felt that if this was continued, we continued to shoot and shoot and shoot, the whole country would be in an uproar over the whole thing. We just simply went along with whatever they felt was best for the country. There were some things that we could photograph and some things we couldn't photograph. Or we wouldn't photograph, let's put it that way. But in defiance to an executive order, you were taking an awful chance. Because if you had a White House card, it wouldn't take them very long to bring you in and say, look, you know, we just have to take the card away from you because of the attitude that you take towards your government.
During the 1930s, during the Depression, there was very little factual news about what was going on, simply because it was a policy of the media, the newsreels, the theatrical newsreels, and the newspapers, to ignore the existence of the Depression. And this was in accordance with the official government point of view from President Hoover down, who said the Depression is a very simple thing, will be over in 60 days.
Leo Seltzer. His film career spans 50 years. A distinguished documentary cameraman and producer, he worked with Edward R. Murrah, was film biographer for the Kennedys, and in 1948, he won an Academy Award. As a teenager in the 1930s, Seltzer joined a radical group called the Film and Photo League. During the early part of the Depression, the forces of the left, including the Communist Party, were the most organized of the voices calling for relief and social change. But first, they had to show what was really happening in the country, and that meant an alternative to the official view as presented in the commercial newsreel. So they developed a series of film programs which they called the Workers' Newsreel. Its object was openly political, to shape public consciousness and mobilize Americans to demand change. Leo Seltzer was one of their first cameramen. These were silent newsreels. Commentary was in the form of titles. They were produced on low budgets, little money for film or equipment, nothing for salaries. These newsreels did not appear in regular movie houses, but they were shown around the country in meeting halls, church basements, and even outdoors, projected from the backs of trucks.
A lot of the footage that we got brought the audience into contact with the activity, unlike the commercial newsreels, which were usually photographed from the top of a large panel truck, photograph everything from a very sort of objective point of view. We had handheld cameras, and I photographed what I was experiencing, not just what I was seeing. We weren't just filmmakers, we actually participated. I was unemployed and I was a worker, so I was participating in these things with a camera in my hand. Very often, the newsreels we made were the only means of information available to workers. And I took these films of city workers on picket lines and demonstrating and showed them. And I rebuilt a projector that could run off a car battery. So with the 16mm print and the special projector, we were able to show these films to farmers in little schoolhouses that had no electricity out west. And when the farmers saw that these films of city people engaged in this conflict and suffering from the Depression, there was an understanding of the extent of this Depression at that time, to the point where no other media brought that information to them.
Union Square, New York City, March 6, 1930. one of the first mass demonstrations against unemployment. Over 20,000 people took part. Police on horseback and motorcycles were determined to break it up. There was considerable violence, and many demonstrators were arrested. This commercial newsreel was never seen by the general public. The New York City Police Department censored it. The footage was acquired by the workers' newsreel and became powerful ammunition in their drive to politicize the nation. As the Depression deepened, demonstrations like these spread across the country, with the workers' newsreel recording many of them on film. In 1932, Leo Seltzer filmed the Veterans Bonus March. His was not the commercial newsreel view of the news.
Well, I went to Washington when the ex-servicemen first arrived there and covered the beginning of the encampment and their first marches and demonstrations. I don't think many of the newsreels covered this. It wasn't of much interest. And again, it was against the point of view of the government, the official point of view. But when the Army came in and ejected the ex-servicemen by force, of course, this was well covered by all the newsreels. The newsreels, like most media today, are concerned primarily with sensationalizing the material they deal with. So with that sort of basic guidance in terms of selecting material, obviously you're going to select not what is most important, most significant, not what is educational, but you're going to select that which will attract and sort of, or confuse or startle most people.
And human pendulum swinging, she heads for the heights. Nearly 1 mile up. And here he is, that daring young man on the flying trapeze. This unusual picture is taken from the blimp. Some thrill, eh? A bat's eye view. Mr. Pate says all you need is a blimp and a trapeze, and you can have the same fun. You can have it.
To later generations more accustomed to critical journalism, newsreels seem suspiciously like mirrors of official reality. One newsreel was even alleged to be receiving secret funding for its overseas edition from the United States Information Agency. That was another day. I remember President Lyndon Johnson watching the evening newscast back in the 60s and thinking back to those early newsreels saying, they don't make news like they used to. No, the newsreels didn't look for journalistic gold medals. From 1911 until their last flickers in 1967, they wanted the audience not to question, but to sit spellbound at the awful, wonderful, startling, or silly surprises flashing on the screen before our eyes. Even with the dawn of nuclear weaponry and the Cold War, they were not the medium to question or disturb. Today, we see this uncritical and star-spangled performance as one of the newsreel's most disturbing failings.
The natural power of the universe is harnessed in the new atomic bomb. Its tremendous possibilities are explained in this chart. The mightiest, most destructive bombs yet produced, such as England's terrifying Grand Slam weighing 11 tons, are puny midgets compared with the new atomic wonder.
If you hear some of the jingoistic rhetoric in some of the commentaries of the old newsreels, it really makes you laugh.
Never before had the nation known such freedom from want. But in this realm of abundance, we reigned alone. Looking toward Europe from Moscow, Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war, with misery and chaos as allies. On orders from the Kremlin, Russia had launched one of history's most political, moral, and economic wars, a Cold War.
Basically, I would say they were right-wing Democrats as far as their politics were concerned. They would generally, I think, reflect the attitude of the administration in power, with whom they worked very closely.
Already an iron curtain had dropped around Poland, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, menace to the security and institutions of democratic government.
2 quacks and a cluck. Boy, no wonder we went out of business. The newsreel finally died of its own weight, its own inability to be there the first with the most. We were old hat when we were on the street, by the time we get to the street.
The theater said, well, there's no sense in us buying the newsreels when the television stations come out the same day with a story that you're holding until the next issue comes out, which happens to be 3 days from now. And the people that come in to see the newsreels say, well, I saw that on television, so what's the use of looking at that?
We were all called into the large screening room and told that the Pathé rooster would crow no more. Men whom I had never known to display any emotion wept openly. It was the end of an era.
Hollywood really didn't care. They wrote it off, they took a tax loss, and jumped back in the swimming pool.
Along with the 5-cent cigar, the Iceman, and the horse-drawn streetcar, the newsreels are dead. Victims of their outmoded style, advancing technology, the competition of television, and our changing fads. They will never again light up the movie screens of the world, never engage and delight audiences with their particular view of the passing parade. But perhaps never is too strong a word, for we have one more newsreel to show you. In 1939, the Westinghouse Electric Company worried over the perishable nature of Western civilization. As a legacy to future generations, they made a time capsule. The capsule was concocted from a copper alloy and sunk into a crypt deep in the ground of Flushing Meadows, New York, at the site of the 1939 World's Fair. On the capsule is the stern message, not to be opened until the year 6939. That's right, 6939. And what will our descendants find when they open up this 5,000-year-old missile from the distant past? Well, they will find an alarm clock, a can opener, a safety pin, a container of tobacco, and a plastic cup in the shape of Mickey Mouse. They will also find detailed instructions on how to build a movie projector. Why a movie projector? Because besides the eyeglasses and fountain pens and other three-dimensional artifacts of our age, are buried a selection from the newsreels. 5,000 years from now, if our descendants can follow instructions, these are the actual newsreels they will get to see. The spring fashions of 1938. Jesse Owens winning the Olympic 100-meter dash. A Harvard-Yale football game. The score, Harvard 13, Yale 14. American sailors coming home from war. The bombing by Japan of Chinese civilians. As to what our descendants will make of these images, we can't even hazard a guess. But the newsreels leave us with this thought. Will they, in the end, be among the last will and testament of the 20th century? As curious and unworldly to our distant heirs as the sculptured ornaments of ancient Sumeria are to us? I'm Bill Moyers.
This program has been brought to you by the people of Chevron, who have been helping to supply America's energy needs throughout the 20th century.